Question 1. Performance analysis shows that a property listed for sale in rural Saskatchewan has a history of being a former gas station. The current owner has provided no environmental reports. As a real estate professional representing the buyer, what is the most prudent course of action to ensure your client is fully informed of potential environmental liabilities? Option A. Advise the client to simply disclose the property's history as a former gas station to potential buyers and let them manage any future environmental concerns. Option B. Suggest the client proceed with the purchase, trusting the seller's implicit assurances that no significant environmental issues exist. Option C. Recommend engaging a qualified environmental consultant to conduct a Phase I environmental site assessment (ESSA) to identify potential contamination risks. Option D. Advise the client to conduct a thorough visual inspection of the property themselves and rely on their own assessment of potential environmental issues. The correct answer is C. Recommend engaging a qualified environmental consultant to conduct a Phase I environmental site assessment (ESSA) to identify potential contamination risks. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate professional in Saskatchewan to navigate potential environmental liabilities that could significantly impact a property's value and the client's financial well-being. Failing to adequately address environmental concerns can lead to legal repercussions, reputational damage, and breaches of fiduciary duty to the client. The Saskatchewan Environmental Protection Act, SEPA, and related provincial guidelines place a responsibility on parties involved in property transactions to be aware of and disclose environmental risks. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively engaging a qualified environmental consultant to conduct a Phase I environmental site assessment (ESSA). This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of due diligence and the regulatory expectations under Saskatchewan's environmental legislation. A Phase I ESA systematically reviews historical records, conducts site inspections, and interviews knowledgeable individuals to identify potential or existing environmental contamination without intrusive soil sampling. This provides the client with a clear understanding of potential risks and informs subsequent decisions, fulfilling the agent's duty of care and adherence to professional standards. Incorrect approaches analysis. Recommending the client proceed with the purchase without any environmental investigation, relying solely on the seller's assurances, is professionally unacceptable. This approach ignores the potential for undisclosed environmental issues, which could lead to significant remediation costs and legal liabilities for the buyer, violating the agent's duty to act in the client's best interest and potentially contravening disclosure obligations under real estate regulations. Suggesting the client conduct a cursory visual inspection themselves and rely on their own judgment about potential contamination is also professionally unsound. A visual inspection is part of a Phase I ESA. It is not a substitute for the systematic and documented process undertaken by a qualified professional. This approach lacks the necessary expertise and objectivity to identify subtle or historical contamination, exposing the client to significant unknown risks, and failing to meet the standard of care expected of a licensed real estate professional in Saskatchewan. Advising the client to simply disclose the presence of the old gas station on the property to the buyer and assume the buyer will handle any environmental concerns is insufficient. While disclosure is important, it does not absolve the agent or the client of the responsibility to investigate potential environmental impacts. The agent has a duty to facilitate a transaction where both parties are reasonably informed of material risks, and simply passing the buck without due diligence is a failure to meet this obligation. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Saskatchewan should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes client protection and regulatory compliance. This involves 1. Identifying potential material risks like historical land use suggesting environmental concerns. 2. Understanding relevant legislation, SEPA, the Real Estate Act of Saskatchewan. 3. Consulting with qualified experts, environmental consultants, when specialized knowledge is required. 4. Communicating risks and options clearly to the client. 5. Documenting all advice and actions taken. Question 2. Operational review demonstrates that a real estate brokerage in Saskatchewan has a buyer client who is the sibling of the listing broker. The listing broker is preparing to present an offer from this buyer to their seller client. What is the most appropriate course of action for the listing broker in Saskatchewan? Option A. Present the offer to the seller without mentioning the buyer's relationship to the brokerage, intending to disclose it after the offer is accepted. Option B. Advise the buyer to submit the offer without disclosing their relationship to the brokerage, with the understanding that the brokerage will handle the disclosure later. Option C. Proceed with negotiating the offer based on the buyer's relationship to the brokerage, assuming the seller will understand the situation. Option D. Immediately disclose the familial relationship between the buyer and the brokerage to the seller, in writing, and obtain the seller's informed consent before proceeding with the offer. The correct answer is D. Immediately disclose the familial relationship between the buyer and the brokerage to the seller in writing and obtain the seller's informed consent before proceeding with the offer. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Saskatchewan to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure compliance with provincial real estate legislation and ethical standards. The broker must act in the best interests of their client, while also being aware of the implications of their actions on other parties and the integrity of the transaction. Careful judgment is required to uphold fiduciary duties and avoid situations that could lead to misrepresentation or breaches of trust. The best professional practice involves immediately disclosing the potential conflict of interest to the seller and obtaining their informed consent in writing before proceeding with any further action related to the buyer's offer. This approach directly addresses the conflict by ensuring transparency and client autonomy. The Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its associated regulations mandate that registrants must avoid conflicts of interest, and when they arise, must disclose them to all affected parties and obtain consent. This proactive disclosure upholds the broker's fiduciary duty to the seller and maintains the integrity of the professional relationship. Proceeding with the offer without informing the seller about the buyer's relationship to the brokerage constitutes a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This lack of transparency breaches the broker's duty of loyalty and disclosure to the seller, potentially leading to a situation where the seller's interests are not being fully represented. Such an action could be construed as misrepresentation and a violation of the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act's provisions regarding conflicts of interest and professional conduct. Another unacceptable approach is to advise the buyer to submit the offer without mentioning their relationship to the brokerage, with the intention of disclosing it later. This is a direct attempt to circumvent the disclosure requirements and is ethically unsound. It prioritizes expediency over transparency and risks undermining the seller's trust and their ability to make an informed decision. This failure to disclose upfront is a breach of the broker's obligation to act with honesty and integrity. Finally, attempting to negotiate the offer solely based on the buyer's relationship to the brokerage, without first obtaining the seller's informed consent to the conflict, is also professionally unacceptable. While understanding the buyer's motivations is part of negotiation, doing so in the context of an undisclosed conflict of interest can lead to perceptions of bias and unfair dealing. The primary obligation remains to the seller, and any negotiation strategy must be transparent and aligned with the seller's best interests, which includes their right to know about potential conflicts. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, client consent, and adherence to regulatory requirements. When a potential conflict of interest arises, the immediate steps should be to identify the nature of the conflict, assess its potential impact on all parties, and then communicate openly and honestly with the client. In this case, the seller, to obtain their informed consent before taking any further action. This proactive and transparent approach is fundamental to maintaining professional integrity and complying with real estate law in Saskatchewan. Question 3. Investigation of a unique specialized agricultural storage building in rural Saskatchewan reveals it has no direct income-generating history and is not a standard construction type. The client, a farmer, needs an estimate of its current market value for potential sale. Which valuation method would best serve the client's needs while adhering to professional standards in Saskatchewan? Option A. A hybrid approach combining elements of all three methods without prioritizing one over the others. Option B. Comparative market analysis, focusing on recently sold agricultural properties with similar functional characteristics and location. Option C. Income approach, projecting potential rental income based on hypothetical agricultural land leases and applying a capitalization rate. Option D, cost approach, estimating the replacement cost of the building and deducting for physical and functional obsolescence. Correct answer is B, comparative market analysis, focusing on recently sold agricultural properties with similar functional characteristics and location. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the real estate professional to select the most appropriate valuation method for a unique property type, balancing the needs of the client with regulatory compliance and ethical practice. The Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its associated regulations mandate that registrants provide competent service and act in the best interests of their clients. This involves understanding the limitations and strengths of different valuation methodologies and applying them judiciously. The most appropriate approach in this scenario is the comparative market analysis. This method is correct because it directly addresses the core principle of market value by comparing the subject property to similar, recently sold properties in the same geographic area. For property like a specialized agricultural building, finding truly comparable sales is paramount. This approach is ethically sound and aligns with regulatory expectations, as it provides a market-based estimate of value that is most relevant to potential buyers and sellers in the Saskatchewan agricultural landscape. It reflects the current market conditions and buyer preferences for similar functional properties. Using the income approach would be professionally unacceptable in this context. While the income approach is valuable for income-generating properties, its application to a specialized agricultural building that may not have a readily quantifiable or consistent income stream is problematic. It relies on assumptions about rental income, vacancy rates, and capitalization rates that may be difficult to ascertain accurately for such a niche property, potentially leading to an unreliable valuation and failing to meet the duty of competence. The cost approach, while useful for newer, purpose-built properties or insurance valuations, is also professionally unacceptable here. This approach estimates value based on the cost to replace or reproduce the property. Less depreciation. For an older agricultural building, accurately estimating accrued depreciation, especially functional and economic obsolescence specific to agricultural use in Saskatchewan, is highly subjective and complex. This can lead to a valuation that does not reflect the actual market demand or saleability of the property, potentially misrepresenting its value to the client. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objective and the property's characteristics. They must then consider which valuation methods are best suited to the specific property type and local market conditions in Saskatchewan. This involves a critical assessment of the data availability and reliability for each approach. Ethical considerations, such as the duty of competence and acting in the client's best interest, should guide the selection, ensuring the chosen method provides a realistic and defensible estimate of market value. Question 4. Comparative studies suggest that real estate brokers in Saskatchewan often face complex situations involving existing property rights. If a seller instructs you, as their listing broker, to market their property for sale, but you are aware that the seller has previously granted a legally binding option to purchase to a third party, what is the most ethically and legally sound course of action to ensure compliance with Saskatchewan's real estate regulations and professional standards? Option A. Advise the seller to ignore the option agreement and proceed with accepting offers from new buyers without addressing the option holder's rights. Option B. Immediately and fully disclose the existence and terms of the option to purchase in writing to all prospective buyers and their representatives, ensuring they are aware of the prior rights before they submit any offers. Option C. Inform prospective buyers about the option but downplay its significance, suggesting it is a minor detail that will likely be resolved. Option D. Proceed with marketing the property and accepting offers, advising prospective buyers that the option is unlikely to be exercised and that their offers will be prioritized. Correct answer is B. Immediately and fully disclose the existence and terms of the option to purchase in writing to all prospective buyers and their representatives, ensuring they are aware of the prior rights before they submit any offers. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate broker in Saskatchewan to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure full disclosure regarding property rights and ownership, particularly when a seller has granted an option to purchase to a third party. The broker's fiduciary duty to their client, the seller, is paramount, but they must also act ethically and transparently with all parties involved in a potential transaction. Mismanagement of this situation could lead to legal disputes, regulatory sanctions, and damage to the broker's reputation. The correct approach involves the broker immediately and fully disclosing the existence of the option to purchase to any prospective buyer and their representative. This disclosure must be in writing and clearly outline the terms of the option, including the option holder's rights and the expiration date. This aligns with the Saskatchewan Real Estate Association (SREA) Code of Ethics and the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act, which mandate honesty, integrity, and full disclosure to all parties in a transaction. By proactively informing potential buyers, the broker ensures they are making an informed decision, respecting the existing option agreement, and upholding their duty of care. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with marketing the property and accepting offers without informing prospective buyers about the existing option. This failure to disclose is a direct violation of the broker's ethical obligations and statutory duties. It misleads potential buyers, potentially causing them to incur expenses in preparing an offer that may be invalid or subject to the prior rights of the option holder. This conduct erodes trust and can lead to claims of misrepresentation or negligence. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay or omit details about the option agreement when discussing it with prospective buyers, perhaps suggesting it is unlikely to be exercised. This is also a serious ethical breach. The broker's role is to present facts accurately, not to speculate or influence a buyer's decision based on personal assumptions. Such behavior undermines the integrity of the transaction and the broker's professional standing. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to advise the seller to ignore the option agreement and proceed with a sale to a new buyer without addressing the option holder's rights. This would be a breach of the seller's contractual obligations and could expose both the seller and the broker to significant legal liabilities. The broker must advise the seller on their legal obligations concerning the option agreement. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes transparency, adherence to legal and ethical standards, and client best interests. This involves 1. Identifying all relevant legal and ethical obligations, e.g., Saskatchewan Real Estate Act, SREA Code of Ethics. 2. Fully understanding the terms of any existing agreements, such as the option to purchase. 3. Disclosing all material facts to all parties involved in a clear and timely manner. 4. Seeking legal counsel if the situation is complex or uncertain. 5. Documenting all communications and actions taken. Question 5. The investigation demonstrates that a real estate broker in Saskatchewan is advising a client on selling their property. While historical sales data for the area shows a consistent upward trend over the past 5 years, recent economic news suggests a potential slowdown in the provincial economy due to declining commodity prices and rising interest rates. Which approach best mitigates risk and upholds professional obligations to the client? Option A. Rely solely on the consistent upward trend of historical sales data to advise the client that the market remains strong and to price the property at the higher end of recent comparable sales. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment by analyzing current economic indicators, employment trends, interest rate forecasts, and provincial policy changes, in addition to historical sales data, to advise the client on potential market shifts and their implications for pricing and timing. Option C. Continue with standard marketing practices and advise the client that the market is stable, without specifically addressing the recent economic news or its potential impact. Option D. Recommend a quick sale at a slightly reduced price to capitalize on the perceived current demand before any potential market downturn occurs, without a detailed analysis of the economic factors. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive risk assessment by analyzing current economic indicators, employment trends, interest rate forecasts, and provincial policy changes, in addition to historical sales data, to advise the client on potential market shifts and their implications for pricing and timing. Explanation. The investigation demonstrates a scenario where a real estate broker in Saskatchewan must navigate the complexities of a shifting market. The challenge lies in providing accurate and timely advice to clients when market trends are uncertain, potentially impacting their investment decisions and the value of their properties. This requires a broker to go beyond simply listing properties and instead act as a trusted advisor, assessing risks and opportunities based on current and projected market conditions. The best professional approach involves a comprehensive risk assessment that considers multiple factors influencing the Saskatchewan real estate market. This includes analyzing local economic indicators, employment trends, population growth or decline, interest rate movements, and any provincial government policies that might affect the housing sector. By synthesizing this information, the broker can identify potential risks such as a market downturn, increased inventory, or declining demand, and opportunities like emerging growth areas or undersupplied segments. This proactive and data-driven approach aligns with the ethical obligation under the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its associated regulations to act in the best interests of the client and to provide competent service. It also reflects the professional standard of due diligence expected of licensed real estate professionals. An approach that focuses solely on historical sales data without considering current economic indicators is professionally deficient. While historical data provides context, it does not account for future market shifts. Relying solely on past performance without forward-looking analysis can lead to misinformed advice and potentially expose clients to undue financial risk, violating the duty of care. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to ignore emerging trends and continue with standard marketing practices as if the market were stable. This demonstrates a lack of diligence and an unwillingness to adapt to changing circumstances. Failing to acknowledge and advise clients on potential market shifts, such as increased competition or a slowdown in buyer activity, can result in clients making poor decisions, such as overpricing their properties or missing opportune selling windows, thereby breaching the broker's fiduciary duty. Furthermore, an approach that prioritizes securing a quick sale over providing sound market advice is unethical and unprofessional. The broker's primary responsibility is to their clients' best interests, not their own commission. Recommending a sale at a potentially undervalued price simply to close a deal quickly, without a thorough assessment of the market's current trajectory and future prospects, is a serious ethical lapse and a violation of professional conduct standards in Saskatchewan. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding the client's objectives and risk tolerance. This should be followed by a thorough market analysis that incorporates both historical data and current/projected trends, considering economic, demographic, and policy factors specific to Saskatchewan. The broker must then clearly communicate these findings, including potential risks and opportunities, to the client, enabling them to make informed decisions. Continuous professional development and staying abreast of market research are crucial components of this framework. Question 6. In Saskatchewan, a real estate broker is advising a client interested in purchasing a property for investment purposes. The client has provided a budget and general investment goals. The broker has access to the property's listing details and has conducted a preliminary review of the neighborhood. What is the most responsible and professionally sound approach for the broker to take in analyzing the investment potential of this property for their client? Option A. Conduct a comprehensive comparative market analysis, CMA, that includes detailed research of comparable sold properties, an assessment of the subject property's condition and features, and an analysis of potential value-add opportunities, such as renovations or zoning considerations. Option B. Accept the seller's projected return on investment figures as a primary basis for advising the client, assuming the seller has conducted their own due diligence. Option C. Focus the analysis exclusively on the potential for immediate rental income, without in-depth consideration of long-term market trends or property condition. Option D. Rely primarily on the property's asking price and the general desirability of the neighborhood to gauge its investment appeal. Correct answer is A. Conduct a comprehensive comparative market analysis, CMA, that includes detailed research of comparable sold properties, an assessment of the subject property's condition and features, and an analysis of potential value-add opportunities, such as renovations or zoning considerations. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate broker in Saskatchewan to advise a client on a potential investment property without relying solely on readily available market data. The challenge lies in synthesizing various qualitative and quantitative factors to provide a well-reasoned recommendation that aligns with the client's objectives and adheres to professional standards and Saskatchewan's real estate regulations. The broker must demonstrate due diligence and ethical conduct by not oversimplifying the analysis or making unsubstantiated claims. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves conducting a comprehensive comparative market analysis, CMA, that goes beyond simple price comparisons. This includes thoroughly researching comparable sold properties, considering their condition, features, and location relative to the subject property. Crucially, it also involves identifying and analyzing potential value-add opportunities, such as renovations or zoning changes, that could enhance the property's future marketability and return on investment. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its associated regulations, which mandate that registrants provide competent service and act in the best interests of their clients. A thorough CMA, incorporating future potential, demonstrates due diligence and provides a well-supported basis for investment advice. Fulfilling the broker's fiduciary duty. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves relying solely on the asking price and general neighborhood desirability. This fails to meet the professional standard of care because it neglects a detailed analysis of comparable sales and the specific attributes of the subject property. It risks providing a superficial recommendation that does not adequately inform the client about the true market value or potential risks and rewards, potentially violating the duty of competence and client best interests under Saskatchewan real estate law. Another incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on the potential for immediate rental income without considering the long-term market trends, property condition, or potential capital appreciation. While rental income is a factor, an investment analysis requires a holistic view. This approach is flawed because it ignores other critical components of investment analysis and could lead to a recommendation that is not financially sound in the long run, potentially misrepresenting the investment opportunity to the client. A final incorrect approach is to base the recommendation solely on the seller's projected return on investment without independent verification. This is ethically problematic and a failure of due diligence. The broker's role is to provide objective advice based on their own analysis, not to simply adopt the seller's optimistic projections. This approach could lead to misrepresentation and a breach of the broker's duty to act honestly and in good faith towards their client, as expected under Saskatchewan's real estate regulatory framework. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic and client-centric approach. This involves first understanding the client's investment goals, risk tolerance, and financial capacity. Then, conduct thorough due diligence, including a comprehensive CMA that considers all relevant factors, both current and future. Critically evaluate all information, including seller representations, and form an independent, well-supported opinion. Communicate findings clearly and transparently to the client, outlining both the potential benefits and risks. This process ensures that advice is competent, ethical, and in the client's best interest, adhering to the principles of professional conduct and regulatory requirements in Saskatchewan. Question 7. Quality control measures reveal that a client in Regina, Saskatchewan, is seeking to purchase a property with a friend. The client explicitly states their intention is for both individuals to own the property together, but also emphasizes that each person should have the freedom to sell their share to whomever they choose or leave it to their own heirs without needing the other person's permission. Based on these stated intentions and the property law of Saskatchewan, which of the following approaches best represents the legally appropriate ownership structure to advise the client on? Option A. Tenancy in common, where each owner holds an undivided interest that can be independently transferred or bequeathed. Option B. Fee simple ownership for one individual with a separate agreement for the friend's contribution. Option C. Joint tenancy, which allows for shared ownership with the right of survivorship. Option D. A leasehold interest, granting exclusive possession for a defined term. The correct answer is A. Tenancy in common, where each owner holds an undivided interest that can be independently transferred or bequeathed. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it involves navigating the complexities of property ownership types in Saskatchewan, specifically when a client expresses a desire to structure their ownership in a way that deviates from standard practices. A real estate professional must accurately identify the client's intent, explain the legal implications of different ownership structures, and advise on the most appropriate and legally sound method to achieve their goals, all while adhering to the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its associated regulations. Misinterpreting the client's wishes or providing incorrect advice could lead to significant legal and financial repercussions for the client and professional liability for the agent. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly identifying the client's stated desire to share ownership with the ability to sell their portion independently, and then accurately translating this into the most suitable legal ownership structure available under Saskatchewan law. This means recognizing that the client is describing characteristics of a tenancy in common, where each owner holds a distinct, undivided interest in the property that can be sold, mortgaged, or willed independently of the other co-owners. The professional's duty is to explain this concept, confirm it aligns with the client's intentions, and then guide them through the process of establishing this form of ownership, likely through the property's title registration. This approach directly addresses the client's expressed needs within the established legal framework of Saskatchewan property law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach would be to assume the client is referring to joint tenancy simply because they mentioned sharing ownership. Joint tenancy, while involving shared ownership, includes the right of survivorship, meaning if one owner dies, their interest automatically passes to the surviving joint tenant, not to their heirs. This fundamentally differs from the client's stated desire to sell their portion independently, which implies the ability to pass their interest to someone other than a co-owner upon death or sale. Failing to distinguish between these two forms of co-ownership and proceeding with joint tenancy would not fulfill the client's stated objective and would be a significant professional failing. Another incorrect approach would be to suggest a leasehold interest. A leasehold interest grants the right to occupy and use a property for a specified period under a lease agreement, but it does not represent ownership of the property itself. The client's desire to share ownership and sell their portion clearly indicates they are seeking an ownership stake, not a temporary right of occupancy. Advising a leasehold interest would misinterpret the fundamental nature of the client's request and fail to provide them with the ownership structure they desire. A further incorrect approach would be to propose a fee-simple ownership structure without any co-ownership. Fee-simple represents absolute ownership of the property. While it allows for independent sale, it does not inherently accommodate the sharing ownership aspect the client explicitly mentioned. If the client intends for multiple individuals to hold ownership rights simultaneously, simply advising fee-simple ownership for one individual would ignore the core of their request for shared ownership. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a structured approach. 1. Active listening and clarification. Thoroughly understand the client's stated goals and desires regarding property ownership. Ask clarifying questions to ensure complete comprehension. 2. Legal framework application. Identify the relevant property ownership types within the Saskatchewan legal framework: fee simple, leasehold, joint tenancy, tenancy in common. 3. Matching intent to structure. Determine which ownership type best aligns with the client's clarified objectives. 4. Clear explanation and advice. Educate the client on the implications, rights, and responsibilities associated with the recommended ownership structure. 5. Documentation and execution. Guide the client through the necessary legal and registration processes to establish the chosen ownership. 6. Ethical adherence. Always act in the client's best interest, providing accurate and legally sound advice in accordance with the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act. Question 8. Regulatory review indicates that a prospective tenant, when viewing a property in Regina, Saskatchewan, asks the real estate agent, "Is this neighborhood considered very family-friendly? We have young children and want to ensure they'll fit in." What is the most appropriate and legally compliant response for the real estate agent to provide? Option A. State that the neighborhood has a good reputation for being family-friendly, based on the agent's general knowledge. Option B. Provide information about the general demographic makeup of the neighborhood, such as the average age of residents or the proportion of families with children. Option C. Directly ask the prospective tenant to elaborate on what specific aspects of a family-friendly neighborhood are important to them to better understand their needs. Option D. Politely redirect the conversation to focus on the property's features and the tenant's general housing needs, such as proximity to amenities or transportation, without directly addressing the family-friendly aspect of the neighborhood. The correct answer is D. Politely redirect the conversation to focus on the property's features and the tenant's general housing needs, such as proximity to amenities or transportation, without directly addressing the family-friendly aspect of the neighborhood. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because real estate professionals in Saskatchewan are entrusted with upholding fair housing principles, which are fundamental to preventing discrimination in housing transactions. The challenge lies in recognizing subtle, yet discriminatory, inquiries and responding in a manner that is both legally compliant and ethically sound, without alienating potential clients or appearing to be evasive. Careful judgment is required to navigate these situations by prioritizing adherence to the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code. The best professional approach involves politely and professionally redirecting the conversation to focus on the property's features and the client's housing needs, while implicitly reinforcing fair housing principles. This approach acknowledges the client's inquiry without validating or engaging with the discriminatory aspect. By focusing on objective criteria related to the property and the client's ability to meet standard rental or purchase requirements, e.g., financial qualifications, lease terms, the professional steers the interaction back to legitimate business considerations. This aligns with the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code's prohibition against discrimination based on protected grounds, including family status and marital status, by ensuring that decisions are made based on objective factors rather than personal characteristics. This proactive redirection prevents the transaction from being influenced by discriminatory intent and upholds the ethical duty of the real estate professional. An incorrect approach involves directly questioning the client about their intentions or the basis of their inquiry regarding the family-friendly nature of the neighborhood. This could inadvertently lead to a discussion about protected characteristics, potentially creating an environment where discrimination could be inferred or explicitly stated, thereby violating the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code. It also risks making the client feel interrogated or judged, which is unprofessional. Another incorrect approach is to provide information that could be interpreted as confirming or denying the family-friendly nature of the neighborhood based on the demographic makeup of current residents. This is problematic because it relies on generalizations and stereotypes, which can perpetuate discrimination, and is not a permissible basis for housing decisions under the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code. Real estate professionals must avoid making assumptions or providing information that could lead to discriminatory housing choices. A further incorrect approach is to ignore the client's comment and proceed with showing the property without any acknowledgement or redirection. While seemingly neutral, this can be interpreted as tacit acceptance of the discriminatory premise of the inquiry. It fails to actively uphold fair housing principles and misses an opportunity to guide the client towards a non-discriminatory understanding of their housing search. Professional decision-making in similar situations requires a commitment to fair housing, a thorough understanding of the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code, and the ability to communicate professionally and ethically. Professionals should always aim to conduct business based on objective criteria and avoid any actions or statements that could facilitate or encourage discrimination. Question 9. Consider a scenario where a real estate broker in Saskatchewan observes a confluence of rising interest rates, increasing inflation, and a noticeable slowdown in property sales volume over the past quarter. A seller client, who has listed their property at a price reflecting the market conditions of 6 months prior, is becoming anxious about their listing's lack of activity. Which of the following approaches best reflects professional and regulatory obligations in this situation? Option A. Advise the seller to immediately reduce their asking price by 15% based on the rumor of a potential future interest rate hike, without conducting further market analysis. Option B. Continue to market the property at the original price without discussing the current economic slowdown or its potential impact on buyer affordability, as the broker's primary role is to list and sell. Option C. Proactively communicate the observed economic shifts and their potential implications for the Saskatchewan real estate market to the seller, advising them on how current trends might influence property valuations and buyer demand, and suggesting a data-driven reevaluation of their pricing strategy. Option D. Assure the seller that the market will rebound quickly and that their property will sell at the current price, encouraging them to wait without providing any updated market data or analysis. The correct answer is C. Proactively communicate the observed economic shifts and their potential implications for the Saskatchewan real estate market to the seller, advising them on how current trends might influence property valuations and buyer demand, and suggesting a data-driven reevaluation of their pricing strategy. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate broker in Saskatchewan to navigate a rapidly changing economic landscape and its direct impact on market values and client expectations. The broker must balance providing accurate, up-to-date information with managing client emotions and potential financial risks, all while adhering to professional standards and provincial regulations. The pressure to secure a sale or a listing can create a temptation to downplay negative economic indicators, which would be a significant ethical and regulatory breach. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves proactively and transparently communicating the observed economic shifts and their potential implications for the Saskatchewan real estate market to clients. This means advising clients on how current interest rate trends, inflation, and employment figures might influence property valuations, buyer demand, and seller expectations. This approach is correct because it aligns with the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its associated regulations, which mandate that registrants act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interests of their clients. Providing informed advice based on economic factors is a core component of professional competence and client care. It empowers clients to make informed decisions, mitigating potential future disputes and upholding the broker's fiduciary duty. Incorrect approach is analysis. Advising a seller to significantly reduce their asking price solely based on a rumor of a potential interest rate hike, without concrete evidence of immediate market impact, is an incorrect approach. This could lead to a premature undervaluation of the property and a loss for the seller, failing to act in their best interest. Furthermore, it bypasses the due diligence required to assess the actual market conditions. Another incorrect approach would be to assure a buyer that property values will continue to rise despite clear indicators of an economic slowdown, such as increasing inventory and declining sales volume. This misrepresentation of market conditions violates the duty of honesty and could lead to a buyer making a poor investment decision, potentially resulting in financial harm and regulatory sanctions. Finally, a broker who chooses to ignore or downplay the impact of rising inflation and its effect on affordability for potential buyers, continuing to market properties at pre-inflationary prices without adjustment, is also acting unprofessionally. This failure to adapt advice to current economic realities demonstrates a lack of diligence and a disregard for the client's ability to secure financing and make a purchase. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client well-being and regulatory compliance. This involves continuous monitoring of economic indicators relevant to the Saskatchewan real estate market, such as interest rates, employment statistics, inflation, and local development projects. When economic shifts occur, the framework dictates a process of analysis, assessing the potential impact on property values, buyer affordability, and seller expectations. This analysis then informs transparent and objective communication with clients, presenting both opportunities and risks. The broker's role is to educate and advise, not to predict the future with certainty or to pressure clients into decisions. Ethical considerations, such as avoiding conflicts of interest and acting with integrity, must guide every interaction. Question 10. Upon reviewing a potential listing in Regina, Saskatchewan, a seller asks you as their licensed real estate broker to provide an estimated net proceeds statement for their property, assuming a sale price of $450,000. To prepare this, you need to account for various costs. You have gathered the following information: mortgage payout of $200,000, real estate commission at 5% of the sale price, legal fees estimated at $2,500, property tax adjustments of $1,200 credit to seller, and a home inspection fee of $500 paid by the seller. What is the estimated net proceeds for the seller? Option A, $211,300. Option B, $221,300. Option C, $220,800. Option D, $210,800. The correct answer is A, $211,300. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate broker in Saskatchewan to accurately calculate and present the net proceeds of a sale, which directly impacts the client's understanding of their financial outcome and their ability to make informed decisions. Miscalculations or misrepresentations can lead to disputes, financial losses for the client, and potential disciplinary action against the broker. The importance of a clear and accurate understanding of the definition and implications of real estate transactions, including all associated costs, is paramount. The best approach involves a meticulous breakdown of all anticipated costs and revenues, leading to a precise net proceeds calculation. This method aligns with the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its associated regulations, which mandate honesty, integrity, and professional competence in all dealings. Specifically, brokers have a fiduciary duty to their clients, which includes providing accurate financial information and advice. A detailed calculation ensures transparency and allows the client to fully comprehend the financial implications of the sale, fulfilling the broker's ethical and legal obligations. An approach that estimates costs broadly without specific figures is professionally unacceptable. This lacks the required transparency and precision, potentially misleading the client about the actual net proceeds. It fails to uphold the broker's duty to provide accurate information and could violate provisions of the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act concerning fair dealing and professional conduct. Another professionally unacceptable approach is to focus solely on the gross sale price and ignore all associated expenses. This provides an incomplete and misleading picture of the client's financial outcome. The definition of real estate transactions encompasses not just the sale price, but also all costs incurred, and failing to account for these is a significant breach of professional duty and regulatory requirements. A third professionally unacceptable approach is to present a calculation that includes only the broker's commission and a few major expenses, omitting others like property taxes, legal fees, or potential repair costs. This selective inclusion of costs creates a skewed and inaccurate net proceeds figure, failing to meet the standard of full disclosure and accuracy expected of a licensed real estate professional in Saskatchewan. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that prioritizes accuracy, transparency, and client understanding. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the client's objectives and the specifics of the property transaction. 2. Identifying all potential revenue streams and all foreseeable expenses associated with the sale. 3. Utilizing accurate, up-to-date cost information from reliable sources. 4. Performing precise mathematical calculations to determine net proceeds. 5. Clearly communicating the detailed breakdown of the calculation to the client, explaining each component. 6. Being prepared to answer client questions and adjust estimates if new information becomes available. Question 11. When evaluating potential tenants for a rental property in Saskatchewan, a property manager has received an application from a prospective tenant who offers to pay several months' rent in advance. The property manager is under pressure from the landlord to fill the vacancy quickly. Which of the following approaches best balances the landlord's immediate financial concerns with the property manager's professional obligations and legal responsibilities under Saskatchewan law? Option A. Accept the tenant immediately based on the offer of several months' rent in advance, as this demonstrates financial capability and satisfies the landlord's immediate need for income. Option B. Inform the landlord that the advance rent offer is sufficient to bypass standard tenant screening procedures, as the landlord's primary concern is immediate cash flow. Option C. Proceed with a cursory review of the application, focusing only on the advance payment, and inform the landlord that a tenant has been secured without conducting full due diligence. Option D. Conduct a thorough screening process, including credit checks, employment verification, and reference checks with previous landlords, while also considering the advance rent offer as part of the overall assessment of the applicant's suitability. The correct answer is D. Conduct a thorough screening process, including credit checks, employment verification, and reference checks with previous landlords, while also considering the advance rent offer as part of the overall assessment of the applicant's suitability. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a property manager in Saskatchewan to balance the immediate financial needs of a landlord with the long-term well-being and legal compliance of the property and its tenants. The property manager must act as a fiduciary, upholding their duties to the landlord while also adhering to the Residential Tenancies Act, 2006, Saskatchewan, and ethical best practices. The pressure to quickly secure a tenant and generate income can lead to overlooking crucial due diligence, potentially resulting in legal disputes, financial losses, and damage to the property manager's reputation. The best approach involves a thorough screening process that prioritizes tenant suitability and adherence to legal requirements. This includes verifying the prospective tenant's financial stability through credit checks and employment verification, assessing their rental history by contacting previous landlords, and conducting a comprehensive background check. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the property manager's fiduciary duty to the landlord to find a reliable and responsible tenant who will fulfill lease obligations and maintain the property. Furthermore, it proactively mitigates risks of non-payment, property damage, and potential eviction proceedings, which are all governed by the Residential Tenancies Act, 2006. By conducting due diligence, the property manager ensures they are acting in the best interests of the landlord and complying with their legal obligations to screen tenants fairly and effectively. An approach that bypasses thorough credit and reference checks to expedite the leasing process is incorrect. This failure to conduct due diligence exposes the landlord to significant risks, such as tenant default on rent payments or property damage, which can lead to costly legal battles and financial losses. Such an oversight violates the property manager's duty of care and could be seen as a breach of their agreement with the landlord. Another incorrect approach would be to accept a tenant based solely on a verbal assurance of their ability to pay rent, without any written verification or background checks. This is a significant ethical and regulatory failure. The Residential Tenancies Act, 2006, implicitly requires a prudent landlord, and by extension, their agent, to take reasonable steps to ensure a tenant's ability to meet their obligations. Relying on mere verbal assurances is not a sound business practice and leaves the landlord vulnerable. Finally, an approach that prioritizes filling the vacancy above all else, even if it means overlooking red flags in a prospective tenant's application, is professionally unacceptable. This demonstrates a lack of commitment to the landlord's best interests and a disregard for the potential negative consequences for both the landlord and the property. It prioritizes short-term gain over long-term stability and responsible property management. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with understanding their fiduciary responsibilities and the relevant legislation, such as the Residential Tenancies Act, 2006. This framework involves establishing clear screening criteria, consistently applying them to all applicants, documenting all steps of the screening process, and making decisions based on objective evidence, rather than subjective impressions or pressure to fill vacancies quickly. Question 12. The analysis reveals that a property located just outside the city limits of Saskatchewan, features a large, well-maintained barn and several outbuildings used for livestock, alongside a modest but habitable farmhouse. The client, a seasoned farmer, intends to purchase the property exclusively for expanding their existing agricultural operations. However, the property also has a small, detached workshop that could potentially be used for light commercial activities. Considering the client's stated intent and the property's dominant features, what is the most appropriate classification for brokerage purposes under Saskatchewan real estate law? Option A, residential, as it includes a farmhouse. Option B, commercial due to the presence of the workshop. Option C, mixed use without further investigation into zoning. Option D, agricultural, with a note to the client about the potential for a secondary workshop use. Correct answer is D, agricultural, with a note to the client about the potential for a secondary workshop use. Explanation. The analysis reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent complexities in classifying real estate for brokerage purposes, particularly when a property exhibits characteristics of multiple types. A broker must exercise careful judgment to ensure accurate representation and compliance with Saskatchewan real estate regulations, which are designed to protect consumers and maintain market integrity. Misclassification can lead to misrepresentation, breaches of fiduciary duty, and potential regulatory sanctions. The best professional approach involves a thorough investigation of the property's primary use and zoning, coupled with a clear understanding of the client's intended purpose for the property. This approach is correct because it prioritizes accurate information and adherence to the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its associated regulations. By identifying the dominant use and confirming zoning, the broker fulfills their duty to represent the property truthfully and to the best of their client's knowledge. This aligns with ethical obligations to act with integrity and competence, ensuring that potential buyers or sellers are fully informed about the nature of the property and any associated restrictions or opportunities. An incorrect approach would be to classify the property solely based on a minor or secondary feature, ignoring the predominant use or zoning. This is professionally unacceptable as it misrepresents the property's fundamental nature and could mislead clients. For instance, classifying a property primarily used for agricultural production with a small residential dwelling as purely residential would fail to disclose crucial agricultural zoning and potential operational considerations. Another incorrect approach is to rely solely on the client's stated preference for classification without independent verification. While client instructions are important, a broker has a professional responsibility to ensure that the classification is accurate and compliant with regulations. Failing to verify could lead to the client making decisions based on inaccurate information, potentially resulting in legal or financial repercussions for both the client and the broker. A further incorrect approach is to assume a classification based on the property's location without considering its specific characteristics and legal status. Location can be a factor, but it does not supersede the actual use, zoning, and legal definition of the property. The professional reasoning process for similar situations should involve a systematic evaluation. First, understand the client's objectives. Second, thoroughly investigate the property's physical characteristics and current use. Third, verify the property's zoning and any relevant municipal bylaws. Fourth, consult relevant sections of the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and regulations pertaining to property types. And finally, communicate the findings and recommended classification to the client, ensuring informed consent. Question 13. The audit findings indicate that a seller in Regina, Saskatchewan, explicitly stated they wished to retain the right to sell their property themselves without owing a commission to the brokerage. However, the listing agreement subsequently signed was an exclusive right to sell listing agreement. Which approach best addresses this discrepancy and ensures compliance with Saskatchewan's real estate regulations? Option A. Amend the listing agreement to an exclusive agency listing agreement, clearly outlining that the seller can sell the property themselves without commission, while the brokerage earns a commission if they or another agent procures the buyer. Option B. Advise the seller that their request is not feasible under standard listing agreements and suggest they consider alternative selling methods. Option C. Issue an open listing agreement, as this allows the seller to sell the property themselves without commission, and any broker can also market it. Option D. Proceed with the exclusive right to sell listing agreement, assuming the seller will not be able to find a buyer independently before the brokerage does. The correct answer is A. Amend the listing agreement to an exclusive agency listing agreement, clearly outlining that the seller can sell the property themselves without commission, while the brokerage earns a commission if they or another agent procures the buyer. Explanation. The audit findings indicate a potential misrepresentation of listing agreement types, which poses a significant professional challenge for real estate brokers in Saskatchewan. Ensuring clients fully understand the implications of different listing agreements is paramount to upholding ethical standards and complying with the Real Estate Act, Saskatchewan, and its associated regulations. Misrepresenting or failing to clearly explain these agreements can lead to disputes, financial loss for clients, and disciplinary action against the brokerage. Careful judgment is required to accurately categorize and present these agreements to clients. The approach that represents best professional practice involves clearly distinguishing between the types of listing agreements and ensuring the client's informed consent regarding the chosen agreement. Specifically, when a seller wishes to retain the right to sell their property themselves without owing a commission, the broker must ensure the agreement accurately reflects this by using an exclusive agency listing agreement. This agreement grants the brokerage the exclusive right to market the property and earn a commission if the sale is made by the brokerage or any other agent, but it carves out an exception for a sale directly by the seller. This aligns with the seller's stated intention and the regulatory requirement to accurately represent the terms of the agreement to the client. Failing to accurately document the seller's intent regarding their right to sell independently, and instead using an exclusive right to sell listing agreement, constitutes a significant ethical and regulatory failure. An exclusive right to sell agreement obligates the seller to pay a commission to the listing brokerage regardless of who procures the buyer, including the seller themselves. This directly contradicts the seller's expressed desire to avoid commission in such a scenario and violates the duty of honesty and full disclosure required under the Real Estate Act, Saskatchewan. Similarly, using an open listing agreement when the seller has specifically requested exclusivity for the brokerage and marketing efforts would be a misrepresentation of the agreement's terms and the services being provided. An open listing allows any broker to market the property and earn a commission, and the seller can also sell the property themselves without owing a commission to any broker, which is not what the seller has indicated they want. Professional reasoning in such situations requires a thorough understanding of the client's objectives and a meticulous application of the different listing agreement types as defined by Saskatchewan real estate law. Brokers must actively listen to and confirm client intentions, clearly explain the rights and obligations associated with each type of listing agreement, and ensure the chosen agreement accurately reflects the agreed-upon terms. When in doubt, seeking clarification from the client or the brokerage's legal counsel is a prudent step to avoid misrepresentation and ensure compliance. Question 14. Implementation of a comprehensive risk assessment for a seller in Saskatchewan, considering the buyer's financial stability, property condition, and market outlook, before advising on a potentially lucrative but complex offer, is the most prudent course of action. A real estate broker in Saskatchewan receives an offer on a client's property that is significantly above the asking price, but the buyer's financing appears somewhat unconventional, and there are some minor but potentially costly repairs noted in the preliminary inspection. The broker is eager to close the deal due to the high commission. What is the most ethically and legally sound approach for the broker to take? Option A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment of the offer, detailing potential financial and property-related risks to the seller, and present this objective analysis to the seller for their informed decision. Option B. Focus solely on the high offer price and assure the seller that any minor repair issues can be easily resolved after closing, without a detailed risk assessment. Option C. Suggest to the seller that they should accept the offer quickly before the buyer changes their mind, without thoroughly investigating the buyer's financial capacity or the implications of the noted repairs. Option D. Immediately advise the seller to accept the offer, emphasizing the high price and downplaying any concerns about the buyer's financing or property condition. The correct answer is A. Conduct a thorough risk assessment of the offer, detailing potential financial and property-related risks to the seller, and present this objective analysis to the seller for their informed decision. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent conflict between a broker's duty to their client and the potential for personal gain or the desire to close a deal quickly. The broker must navigate this situation with utmost integrity, ensuring compliance with Saskatchewan's real estate regulations and ethical standards. The core of the challenge lies in maintaining objectivity and prioritizing the client's best interests above all else, even when faced with a potentially lucrative offer that might not be ideal for the client. The best approach involves a thorough and objective risk assessment of the proposed transaction for the client. This means meticulously evaluating all aspects of the offer, including the buyer's financial capacity, the property's condition, potential future market fluctuations, and any clauses that could negatively impact the seller. The broker must then present this comprehensive risk assessment to the seller, clearly outlining both the potential benefits and drawbacks of accepting the offer. This approach is correct because it directly aligns with the broker's fiduciary duty to act in the client's best interest, as mandated by Saskatchewan real estate legislation and professional ethics. It ensures the seller is fully informed and empowered to make a decision based on a clear understanding of the risks involved, rather than being swayed by potentially biased advice or incomplete information. An incorrect approach would be to immediately advise the seller to accept the offer based on the high price alone, without conducting a detailed risk assessment. This fails to uphold the broker's duty of care and diligence, as it overlooks potential pitfalls that could harm the seller financially or legally. Such an action could be seen as prioritizing a quick commission over the client's well-being, violating ethical principles and potentially contravening provisions of the Real Estate Act of Saskatchewan that require brokers to act honestly and in good faith. Another incorrect approach would be to downplay any concerns raised by the seller about the offer's terms or the buyer's background, focusing solely on the attractive price. This demonstrates a lack of professional objectivity and a failure to adequately represent the client's interests. It ignores the broker's responsibility to identify and communicate all material facts and risks, which is a cornerstone of responsible real estate practice in Saskatchewan. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to pressure the seller into accepting the offer by suggesting that similar high offers are unlikely to be received again. This constitutes undue influence and misrepresentation, as it attempts to manipulate the seller's decision-making process. It is unethical and breaches the trust placed in the broker, who is expected to provide impartial advice and guidance. The professional reasoning process for such situations should always begin with a clear understanding of the client's objectives and risk tolerance. This is followed by a comprehensive due diligence process, including a thorough risk assessment of any proposed transaction. All findings, both positive and negative, must be communicated transparently and objectively to the client. The broker's role is to advise and facilitate, not to dictate or pressure. Question 15. To address the challenge of a prospective buyer in Regina, Saskatchewan, who expresses a strong desire for a luxury property but indicates a significantly lower pre-approval amount, what is the most responsible course of action for a licensed real estate broker? Option A. Focus solely on the buyer's stated desire for luxury properties and defer any discussion about their pre-approval amount until an offer is being considered. Option B. Conduct a detailed discussion about the buyer's financial pre-approval, explore potential adjustments to their search criteria or financing strategy, and provide realistic market insights based on their approved budget. Option C. Immediately begin showing properties within the buyer's desired luxury price range, assuming they may be able to secure additional financing or negotiate a lower price. Option D. Advise the buyer to increase their pre-approval amount significantly, without a thorough understanding of their financial capacity or the risks involved. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed discussion about the buyer's financial pre-approval, explore potential adjustments to their search criteria or financing strategy, and provide realistic market insights based on their approved budget. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate broker in Saskatchewan to navigate a situation where a potential client's stated intentions might conflict with their financial capacity and the broker's fiduciary duties. The broker must balance the client's desires with the realities of the market and their legal obligations to ensure a transaction is viable and ethical. Careful judgment is required to avoid misrepresentation, undue influence, or facilitating a transaction that is not in the client's best interest or is unlikely to close. The best approach involves the broker conducting a thorough pre-qualification assessment and openly discussing the client's financial realities with them. This includes understanding their budget, financing options, and the implications of market conditions on their purchasing power. The broker must then advise the client on realistic expectations and potential adjustments to their search criteria or financial strategy. This aligns with the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its associated regulations, which mandate that registrants act with honesty, integrity, and in the best interests of their clients. Specifically, the duty to advise and inform clients about matters that may affect their transaction is paramount. Facilitating a search without a realistic understanding of the client's financial capacity could lead to wasted time, disappointment, and potentially a breach of duty if the broker knows or ought to know the client cannot secure financing. An incorrect approach would be to immediately begin showing properties that exceed the client's stated financial capacity, even if the client expresses a strong desire for them. This fails to uphold the broker's duty to act in the client's best interest by not managing expectations or exploring financial feasibility upfront. It risks leading the client down a path of unrealistic expectations and potential disappointment, and could be seen as a failure to provide competent service. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the client's stated financial limitations and proceed with showing properties at the higher end of their wish list without a clear understanding of their actual borrowing power. This ignores the fundamental requirement to ensure a transaction is likely to be successful and could lead to the client making an offer they cannot fulfill, potentially resulting in the loss of their deposit and legal repercussions for all parties. The broker has a responsibility to guide the client towards achievable goals. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to advise the client to stretch their budget significantly without a detailed discussion of the risks and consequences, or without ensuring they have consulted with a mortgage professional. This could be construed as encouraging a financially imprudent decision, which is contrary to the broker's ethical obligations and the spirit of the Real Estate Act, which emphasizes responsible conduct. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes client understanding and realistic goal setting. This involves active listening to understand the client's needs and desires, followed by a diligent assessment of their financial capacity through pre-qualification discussions. Open and honest communication about market realities and potential challenges is crucial. If there is a significant gap between the client's aspirations and their financial capabilities, the broker's role is to educate and guide them towards achievable solutions, which may involve adjusting their search or financial strategy, rather than simply accommodating unrealistic expectations. Question 16. Examination of the data shows that a real estate investor in Saskatchewan is seeking to acquire a commercial property and is considering two distinct financing strategies: securing a short-term, high-interest loan from a private lender, hard money loan, or negotiating a purchase agreement where the seller provides the financing directly, seller financing. As a licensed real estate broker in Saskatchewan, what is the most prudent and compliant course of action to advise the investor on these financing options? Option A. Recommend that the investor proceed with seller financing, focusing solely on the potential for lower interest rates, and suggest that the seller's legal counsel will handle all necessary documentation and disclosures. Option B. Thoroughly explain the terms, risks, and regulatory considerations of both hard money loans and seller financing, ensuring the investor fully understands their implications, and recommend seeking independent legal and financial advice for each option. Option C. Facilitate the hard money loan by connecting the investor with lenders who offer the quickest approvals, and encourage the investor to accept the seller's financing terms without detailed review, assuming the seller is acting in good faith. Option D. Advise the investor to prioritize the hard money loan due to its speed of funding, and assist in expediting the loan process without delving deeply into the associated risks or the seller's capacity to offer financing. The correct answer is B. Thoroughly explain the terms, risks, and regulatory considerations of both hard money loans and seller financing, ensuring the investor fully understands their implications, and recommend seeking independent legal and financial advice for each option. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate broker in Saskatchewan to navigate the complexities of investor financing, specifically hard money loans and seller financing, while adhering to the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its associated regulations. The broker must ensure that any financing arrangements presented to clients are not only financially viable for the investor, but also compliant with disclosure requirements and ethical standards designed to protect all parties involved. Misrepresenting the nature or risks of these financing options, or failing to ensure proper documentation and understanding, can lead to significant legal and ethical repercussions. The best professional approach involves thoroughly understanding the investor's financial capacity and risk tolerance, and then presenting financing options that are transparent, compliant, and clearly outline the terms and potential risks. This includes ensuring that any hard money loan is sourced from a legitimate lender, and that all terms are clearly disclosed to the borrower, and that seller financing arrangements are structured in accordance with provincial laws, with all parties fully understanding their obligations and the implications of the agreement. This aligns with the broker's fiduciary duty to act in the best interests of their client and to uphold the integrity of the real estate profession in Saskatchewan. Presenting hard money loans without a clear understanding of the lender's due diligence and the borrower's ability to repay, or without full disclosure of the higher interest rates and fees associated with such loans, is professionally unacceptable. This can be seen as facilitating a potentially predatory lending situation. Similarly, structuring seller financing without ensuring all legal requirements are met, such as proper registration of any security interests or clear disclosure of the seller's rights and the buyer's obligations, can lead to disputes and legal challenges, and may violate provincial real estate laws regarding disclosure and fair dealing. Facilitating an arrangement where the seller acts as a lender without proper legal counsel or understanding of their rights and responsibilities as a creditor is also problematic. Professionals should adopt a decision-making process that prioritizes client education and regulatory compliance. This involves a comprehensive assessment of the client's needs and financial situation, followed by a detailed explanation of all available financing options, including their respective risks and benefits. Brokers must ensure that all proposed transactions are structured in a manner that is legally sound and ethically responsible, seeking legal counsel when necessary to ensure compliance with Saskatchewan's real estate legislation and to protect the interests of all parties involved. Question 17. Research into tenant screening practices in Saskatchewan has highlighted the importance of a fair and legally compliant selection process. A property manager is reviewing applications for a vacant unit. Which of the following screening approaches best aligns with Saskatchewan's regulatory framework and ethical considerations for tenant selection? Option A. Inquiring about the applicant's age and national origin to ensure they fit the desired demographic profile for the property. Option B. Relying on personal intuition and first impressions during the viewing to gauge the applicant's character and likelihood of being a good tenant. Option C. Asking about the applicant's family size and marital status to understand their living situation and potential for long-term tenancy. Option D. Verifying employment and income to confirm the applicant's financial capacity to pay rent, checking references from previous landlords for rental history and reliability, and conducting a credit check to assess financial responsibility. Correct answer is D. Verifying employment and income to confirm the applicant's financial capacity to pay rent, checking references from previous landlords for rental history and reliability, and conducting a credit check to assess financial responsibility. Explanation. Research into tenant screening processes in Saskatchewan reveals that while landlords aim to select reliable tenants, they must navigate a complex landscape of legal and ethical considerations. The professional challenge lies in balancing the landlord's legitimate interest in mitigating risk with the tenant's right to fair treatment and non-discrimination. Missteps in screening can lead to legal disputes, reputational damage, and the selection of unsuitable tenants, all of which negatively impact the rental property's success. The best approach involves a systematic and objective evaluation of potential tenants based on criteria directly related to their ability to fulfill the tenancy agreement. This includes verifying rental history, employment stability, and financial capacity to pay rent. Crucially, all screening must be conducted in a manner that strictly adheres to Saskatchewan's Human Rights Code, prohibiting discrimination based on protected grounds such as race, religion, family status, and disability. Information gathered should be relevant, accurate, and used solely for the purpose of assessing tenancy suitability. This method ensures compliance with provincial law and ethical best practices, fostering a fair and transparent rental market. An approach that relies on subjective impressions or personal biases is fundamentally flawed. Basing a decision on a gut feeling about a prospective tenant without objective supporting evidence opens the door to unconscious discrimination and violates the principles of fairness and equity enshrined in Saskatchewan's human rights legislation. This can lead to legal challenges and undermine the integrity of the screening process. Another problematic approach is to request information that is not directly relevant to a tenant's ability to meet their obligations under the lease agreement. For example, inquiring about a prospective tenant's immigration status or their political affiliations goes beyond the scope of legitimate screening and constitutes an invasion of privacy, potentially violating human rights legislation. Such inquiries are discriminatory and unprofessional. Furthermore, an approach that involves making assumptions about a tenant's reliability based on their appearance or the presence of children is also unacceptable. These assumptions are rooted in stereotypes and can lead to discriminatory outcomes, contravening the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code. Professional tenant selection requires an objective assessment of verifiable information, not prejudiced assumptions. Professionals should adopt a decision-making framework that prioritizes objective data collection, consistent application of screening criteria across all applicants, and strict adherence to anti-discrimination laws. This involves developing a clear screening policy, training all individuals involved in the process, and maintaining thorough, confidential records of all screening activities. When in doubt, consulting with legal counsel or a professional property management association is advisable to ensure compliance and best practice. Question 18. Which approach would be most appropriate for a licensed real estate broker in Saskatchewan when representing a seller whose property is being considered for purchase by a buyer who has also expressed interest in acquiring adjacent parcels for a significant development project, and the broker is aware of the buyer's broader intentions? Option A. Immediately and fully disclose to the seller the buyer's expressed interest in acquiring adjacent properties and their stated intentions for a larger development project, advising the seller that this information may influence the perceived value and desirability of their property. Option B. Inform the seller that the buyer is interested in their property, but omit any details about the buyer's interest in adjacent parcels or their development aspirations. To avoid potentially complicating the current sale, option C, advise the seller that the buyer's interest in adjacent properties is a matter for the buyer to disclose directly to the seller, and the broker's role is limited to facilitating the current transaction. Option D, proceed with the sale of the seller's property, focusing solely on the current offer and advising the seller that information about the buyer's plans for other properties is not directly relevant to the current transaction. The correct answer is A. Immediately and fully disclose to the seller the buyer's expressed interest in acquiring adjacent properties and their stated intentions for a larger development project, advising the seller that this information may influence the perceived value and desirability of their property. Explanation: this scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires a real estate broker in Saskatchewan to navigate potential conflicts of interest and ensure transparency while upholding their fiduciary duties to their clients. The broker must balance their desire to facilitate a transaction with the legal and ethical obligations to disclose all material facts and avoid misrepresentation. Careful judgment is required to ensure all parties are fully informed and that the transaction proceeds ethically and legally under Saskatchewan's real estate legislation. The best approach involves a proactive and transparent disclosure process. This means immediately informing the seller about the potential buyer's interest in acquiring adjacent properties and the buyer's intention to potentially rezone or develop them. This approach aligns with the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its associated regulations, which mandate full disclosure of all material facts that could influence a client's decision. Ethically, it upholds the broker's duty of loyalty and good faith to the seller by providing them with all relevant information to make an informed decision about the sale price and terms. It also respects the buyer's right to pursue their development goals while ensuring the seller is not disadvantaged by a lack of information. An approach that involves withholding information from the seller about the buyer's broader development intentions is professionally unacceptable. This failure to disclose material facts constitutes a breach of the broker's fiduciary duty to the seller and violates the principles of honesty and fair dealing mandated by Saskatchewan real estate law. Such an omission could lead to legal repercussions for the broker and damage their reputation. Another unacceptable approach would be to proceed with the sale without clearly documenting the buyer's stated intentions for the adjacent properties, even if some verbal communication occurred. The absence of clear, written disclosure leaves room for misinterpretation and disputes, and it fails to provide the seller with concrete evidence of the information they were privy to. This lack of formal documentation is a significant regulatory and ethical failing. Finally, an approach that prioritizes securing the commission over full disclosure is a severe ethical breach. The broker's primary obligation is to their client's best interests, not their own financial gain. Acting in a manner that could be perceived as self-serving by withholding critical information is contrary to the professional standards expected of a licensed real estate broker in Saskatchewan. The professional reasoning framework for such situations involves a commitment to transparency, thorough due diligence, and adherence to all legal and ethical obligations. Brokers should always ask themselves, am I providing my client with all the information they need to make a fully informed decision? And is this action consistent with the spirit and letter of the Saskatchewan Real Estate Act and its regulations? When in doubt, seeking clarification from regulatory bodies or legal counsel is always advisable. Question 19. The efficiency study reveals that a unique older commercial property in Regina, Saskatchewan with a specialized operational history is being considered for sale. As a licensed real estate broker, which valuation method would you prioritize to provide the most accurate and defensible market value estimate to your client, adhering to the Real Estate Act, Saskatchewan, and ethical standards? Option A. Income approach, by projecting future rental income and applying a market-derived capitalization rate. Option B. Cost approach, by estimating the cost to replace the building, subtracting depreciation and adding the value of the land. Option C. A hybrid approach combining elements of all three methods without a clear prioritization. Option D. Comparative market analysis, by examining recent sales of similar commercial properties in the Regina area and making appropriate adjustments for differences. The correct answer is D. Comparative market analysis, by examining recent sales of similar commercial properties in the Regina area and making appropriate adjustments for differences. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because a real estate broker in Saskatchewan must select the most appropriate valuation method for a unique commercial property. The challenge lies in understanding the limitations of each method when applied to a property with specific characteristics, ensuring compliance with the Real Estate Act, Saskatchewan, and its associated regulations, and upholding ethical obligations to clients. A broker's duty of care requires them to provide accurate and reliable information, which necessitates choosing a valuation method that best reflects the property's true market value under the prevailing conditions. The most appropriate approach in this situation is the comparative market analysis. This method is correct because it directly addresses the principle of substitution, which is fundamental to real estate valuation. It involves analyzing recent sales of similar properties in the same geographic area, adjusting for differences in features, location, and condition. For commercial property with a unique operational history, this method is often the most reliable indicator of what a willing buyer would pay, as it reflects actual market behavior. The Real Estate Act, Saskatchewan, and the Saskatchewan Real Estate Association Code of Ethics implicitly require brokers to use methods that are grounded in observable market data and are most likely to produce a realistic valuation for their clients. This approach aligns with the ethical duty to provide competent service and avoid misrepresentation. Using the income approach would be professionally problematic in this scenario. While the income approach is valuable for income-generating properties, its effectiveness is heavily reliant on accurate projections of future income and expenses, and the selection of an appropriate capitalization rate. For a property with a unique operational history, historical income may not be a reliable predictor of future performance, and market-wide capitalization rates might not accurately reflect the specific risks and opportunities associated with this particular business. This reliance on subjective projections can lead to a valuation that is not firmly rooted in current market realities, potentially misrepresenting the property's value to the client and violating the duty of care. The cost approach would also be professionally unacceptable. This method estimates value by calculating the cost to replace or reproduce the property, less depreciation, plus the land value. For an older, unique commercial property, accurately determining the cost of reproduction or replacement, and especially the amount of accrued depreciation, both physical and functional/economic obsolescence, can be highly subjective and difficult. Furthermore, the cost approach often overestimates value for older properties where functional obsolescence or outdated design is significant, or where market demand does not support the cost of construction. This method is generally less reliable for older, unique commercial properties compared to methods that directly reflect market demand and comparable sales. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes data-driven methods reflecting current market conditions. This involves first understanding the property's type and characteristics, then considering the primary drivers of value for that property type. For unique commercial properties, a thorough market analysis, including comparable sales, is typically the most robust starting point. If the property has a strong income-generating component, the income approach can be used as a secondary or supporting method, but its assumptions must be rigorously tested against market data. The cost approach should generally be considered a tertiary method for older or unique properties, primarily useful for establishing a ceiling on value or for insurance purposes. The broker must always be able to justify the chosen method and its assumptions based on available market evidence and regulatory requirements. Question 20. Strategic planning requires a real estate agent in Saskatchewan to consider all potential commission scenarios when representing both a seller and a buyer in a dual agency transaction. If the listing agreement stipulates a total commission of 5% of the sale price, and the buyer representation agreement specifies that the buyer's agent, the same agent, is entitled to 5% of the sale price, and the property sells for $450,000, what is the maximum amount the seller's portion of the commission can be, assuming the seller's agent is entitled to the remainder of the total commission after the buyer's agent's share is accounted for? Option A, $10,000. Option B, $15,000. Option C, $22,500. Option D, $11,250. Correct answer is D, $11,250. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a real estate agent in Saskatchewan to navigate the complexities of a potential dual agency situation while ensuring full compliance with the Real Estate Act and its associated regulations. The agent must balance their fiduciary duties to both parties, maintain confidentiality, and avoid conflicts of interest, all while accurately calculating commission splits based on differing agreements. Missteps can lead to ethical breaches, regulatory penalties, and damage to professional reputation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves clearly identifying the dual agency situation upfront and obtaining informed written consent from both the seller and the buyer, as mandated by Saskatchewan's real estate legislation. This consent must explicitly outline the agent's role, the potential conflicts of interest, and how commission will be handled. The agent must then meticulously calculate the commission split based on the agreed-upon terms in both the listing agreement and the buyer representation agreement, ensuring transparency and fairness to both parties. This approach upholds the agent's duty of loyalty and disclosure, preventing any perception of favoritism or misrepresentation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to proceed with representing both parties without obtaining explicit, informed written consent for dual agency. This violates the fundamental principle of disclosure and loyalty required by the Real Estate Act, as it fails to inform both parties of the inherent conflict of interest. The agent would be in breach of their fiduciary duties, potentially leading to legal action and disciplinary measures from the Saskatchewan Real Estate Commission. Another incorrect approach is to unilaterally decide on a commission split without consulting or agreeing with both the seller and the buyer, even if written consent for dual agency was obtained. This demonstrates a lack of transparency and fairness, undermining the trust essential in agency relationships. The agent is obligated to act in the best interests of both clients, which includes ensuring equitable commission arrangements that are clearly understood and agreed upon by all parties involved. Failure to do so constitutes a breach of ethical conduct and regulatory requirements. A further incorrect approach is to prioritize the commission from one party over the other during negotiations, even in a dual agency scenario. This is a direct violation of the agent's duty of impartiality and fair dealing. The agent must represent both parties' interests to the best of their ability within the confines of dual agency, without favoring one over the other, especially when it comes to financial outcomes. Such preferential treatment is unethical and contrary to the spirit and letter of Saskatchewan's real estate laws. Professional reasoning. Professionals should always begin by identifying potential conflicts of interest. When a dual agency situation arises, the immediate priority is to secure informed written consent from all parties, clearly outlining the implications. All financial arrangements, including commission splits, must be transparent and agreed upon in writing by all involved. If at any point the agent feels they cannot adequately represent both parties' interests impartially, they should decline dual agency and advise the parties to seek separate representation. Adherence to the Real Estate Act and its regulations, coupled with a strong ethical compass, is paramount in navigating these complex situations.